We break down the first day of Chicago Bears training camp and 5 position battles you need to watch out for next on the Unbearable Sports Podcast.
Yeah, she's got some nice long
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron, and welcome back to another great episode. We are going to be breaking down this first practice for the Chicago Bears training camp, and it was private, so I had to kind of scour the web. I'm not technically part of the media. I just have a show, but I just was kind of pulling all sorts of different sources together so that we have a quick little episode on what you may have missed and what went down. But also, we need to break down some of these position battles because there's a good handful of them going on for the Chicago Bears. If you're watching us out on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, if you have the podcast, make sure to rate us 5 stars. You can also look for us anywhere you get your podcast apps. Just search for Unbearable Sports. We're still on the quest for 1,000 subscribers, so if you're watching, that helps so much. And once we reach that, I will donate $100 to the American Diabetes Association. So thank you all so much. But guys, let's get this show on the road. So we started out training camp with the first day, and it was hard because it was private and it sounded like the media was really, really far away. So the media just could not see what was going on too much, but there was still a gist of kind of what happened. So the first piece, we talked about this yesterday. What's going on with Robert Quinn? We said Robert Quinn's either not going to do anything and it's going to be a big stink, or he's going to probably go in and be like, yeah, I was working out my body, and what's the big deal? And that's actually what happened. He went in and just basically was like, yeah, I don't know what the big deal is. I'm doing totally fine. And yeah, now is it all over? It seems this way. But Robert Quinn did kind of have this kind of like depressed tone, if you will, during his interview, if you listen to it, where it just kind of seems like, yeah, I've been traded before. I've been traded twice, and I thought I did enough. So am I going to get traded? So it was definitely a weird vibe overall to the interview, but he wants to be here. He cleared that up and just kind of said like, hey, I'm going to be here. So we'll just have to see. So we still want to at least look to see if there are any trade rumors out there, anything like that. But honestly, what's good is he's here. He's going to be practicing, and we want that veteran pass rusher on the opposite side. So best of luck. Let's wreak some havoc, because a lot of reporters did say that the edge rushers, the defensive ends, were looking pretty darn good today. So it's nice to know, because defensive line is something that we're concerned about. It's nice to know that our defensive ends look like they can bring the heat so far, day one. But next is Roquan Smith was then put on the PUP, physically unable to perform list. Now, this isn't like when you go over to right before the season starts where you have to miss a certain amount of games. This designation is more so because kind of like not necessarily a failed physical. There's something that they didn't like, that he wasn't able to take a physical, so they put him on the PUP list. Some conspiracy theorists think that there's a greater piece to it, but basically we just have to see what's wrong with Roquan. He was just on an exercise bike, but also with this designation, they're able to actually bring in another player. So maybe they bring in another linebacker. We've talked about that on the last episode, where it might be good for the Chicago Bears to bring in a backup or bring in someone at that Sam linebacker position. So if I were them, I'd try somebody out. But we'll see who they end up adding and how long Roquan Smith is going to be on that PUP list. But really, to me, it doesn't sound any alarms. What sounds the alarms for me is the contract negotiation, not the PUP list. But there's a couple other people like Crookshank. Nobody too crazy, except for Crookshank being on an injured list. Now, next is fairly big news. Kyler Gordon played at the slot today and also played a little bit on the outside. They wanted to see him in the slot. They wanted to see him outside. Now, I thought that they were just going to stick with somebody at one spot so that they could learn it. So I was kind of surprised by this. We knew that Kyler Gordon had this versatility coming out of college, and it's nice to see that they are at least playing around with it. But spoiler alert, this cornerback position, we'll talk about it more, is going to be very, very interesting because if Kyler Gordon can play on the inside, who's going to be on the outside? Is that going to be Thomas Graham? Tavon Young played 50-50 snaps inside and outside, and him who shall not be named, Kindle Vildor, has played on the outside as well and has filled in. I hate saying that, but we'll just have to see. So it's going to be an interesting battle, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But the next little piece of news, it was going to be a mystery, quote unquote, if where Riley Reiff was going to line up. He lined up at left tackle today, and Schofield lined up at the right guard. So pretty much cementing that they like Riley Reiff at that left tackle spot, and he's most likely, it would be a shock if he ended up not starting. It's pretty much his position unless he does something wrong. But he did open up a little bit more today. Riley Reiff was really talking about how he actually had a couple other offers, and the Bears reached out earlier, and he ended up finding out that this was probably the best offer, and he wanted to go to the Bears. He joked about being with the NFC North a lot because he was with the Minnesota Vikings and Detroit Lions. He also talked about this system being very familiar to him because it's similar to a Kubiak system that he ran with the Vikings. And a Kubiak system was also something that was ran in for the Chargers, which is where Schofield came from. So two kind of scheme fits that we're able to get for pretty cheap. And that's the other piece that I want to touch on with Riley Reiff as well, because I see a lot of people saying, we paid $12.5 million for this guy. That's crazy talk. But I just want to break down the contract a little bit. So the contract itself, he gets $3 million as a base salary. So $3 million for sure. Then he can get $4.5 million if he's on the field for at least 10% of offensive snaps, and if the team improves in any of 6 offensive categories. What are those categories? We don't know. But basically, if the offense is better, which we hope it is, then he would get an additional $4.5 million, raising it up to $7.5 million. Then another $2.5 million is actually tied to his playing time. Yet again, not a lot of details on that. And then the last $2 million is if they make the playoffs. So pretty much, if you think that this is a playoff contending team, then yes, it would be 12.5. But if you don't, it's probably 10.5 or even less than that. So a very impressive deal. A lot of incentives added to this deal for Riley Reiff. But seriously, we got a starting caliber, kind of just like a middle of the road, little slightly better than average type of tackle. And I am more than happy with that. I want this line to be average, and it sounds so sad and depressing saying that, but you're not expecting this to be elite. You just want Justin Fields not to get killed, and he's that type of player that can be out here and give you good play. Now, some other little storylines out of training camp before we get into the next section. Velus Jones Jr. and Darnell Mooney both scored touchdowns on Kyler Gordon. A lot of people are saying Velus Jones Jr. looked really impressive, making a really good move on Kyler Gordon, and was able to be wide open and make it for a touchdown. So does that say a lot on Kyler Gordon? I mean, there's got to be a winner. There's got to be a loser. And unfortunately, Kyler Gordon was the loser on 2 separate tight ends. But also, flipping it over to the defensive side of the ball, there was at least 2 noted interceptions, one by Jaquan Brisker in the end zone, I believe. So great plays. I also heard he broke up a couple passes. Brisker's going to be good. Let's just take a victory lap already. Brisker's going to be good. Let's celebrate. We got a good safety. But then Jack Sanborn, my boy, the linebacker from Wisconsin, undrafted, who actually was the starting Sam linebacker because Roquan wasn't there. So basically what happened is Matt Adams was then the starting weak side linebacker where Roquan should have been. And then Nicholas Morrow was the starting middle linebacker. And then Jack Sanborn, not Joe Thomas, was the starting Sam linebacker. So what we would assume is when Roquan's back in, then you would shift everyone over, and then Matt Adams should be that starting Sam linebacker, and Sanborn actually being the backup. But he did get an interception. We criticized a little bit of his pass coverage, but bravo to him. And the last little bit of notes before we get into the everything else, let's talk about the punt returns, because Velus Jones Jr., as expected, returned punts. Then Dante Pettis, kind of as expected, returned punts. Then Fink, the backup wide receiver, returned some punts. And Bojack. We saw Eddie Jackson returning punts as well. I think they're just trying to see who's good out there, because this is a new special teams coordinator. He wants to see who's out there. So I respect that. But really, Velus Jones Jr. is most likely going to be that guy that's doing the returning. And maybe Dante Pettis if he ends up making the roster. I mean, after all, Madden loves Dante Pettis. Gave him like the highest grade out of all of our wide receivers. So he is kind of a playmaker. It'll be interesting to see what he can do out there. But that kind of wraps up day one of training camp. I will actually be there tomorrow. So tomorrow I will actually have a episode break down what I saw. If you go out there, look for me. I'll be wearing an Unbearable Sports shirt. So if you see me, say hey, and we'll talk. But let's move on to what the whole thing about this episode is going to be about, and this is the position battles. So the position battles for the Bears, we're going to go through 5, starting with probably the weakest one out there, but the most interesting, and this could be an actual big competition. We don't know yet. We won't know until the pads come on, and the pads will come on Tuesday. I believe Tuesday. It's either Tuesday or Monday, so I won't see them in pads, but we will see. So the big competition is right below me at the right tackle spot. Larry Borom versus Teven Jenkins. Even though that Schofield and Riley Reiff aren't going to be the true number ones maybe for this week, they will be the number ones. It would be a shock if they ended up not getting that position. But Larry Borom right now is the favorite to be the starting right tackle. Now, we've talked about this before. Teven Jenkins needs to show his athleticism, needs to show his strength, needs to show that why we drafted him in the second round and why people wanted him in the first. If you don't remember this, early on about last year, my brother Blake and I, we used to do the show together, and he was telling us how Teven Jenkins' back problem, after he gets the surgery, it shouldn't be an issue. It's not like Chris Williams, where basically what they were doing with Jenkins was just cleaning some stuff up. So now it's all about, can he play? And I still think that Larry Borom is going to be the starter. It still seems like he's the safest option. But Teven Jenkins, I think, just needs to prove that he belongs in this league, and then he would get that spot. Who do you think is going to be the starting right tackle? If you're watching out on YouTube, let me know down in the comments. But next position battle that we have going out here is the linebackers. Now, it's not Roquan Smith and Nicholas Morrow. Those are pretty much set in stone. But this Sam linebacker, the strong linebacker, if you will, right now it's Matt Adams. And Matt Adams is a smaller guy that only really played special teams. Maybe there's something that Eberflus and Allen Williams know about this guy that we just don't know yet. But Jack Sanborn, I should have bumped him up on my graphic. Jack Sanborn right now is the number 2 guy at this strong linebacker position, the undrafted rookie free agent out of Wisconsin. And we said that he's this dark horse that can get this starting job. It doesn't seem like the Bears are really affected by Matt Adams being arrested, since he was already out there, already starting. So to me, it's something that Jack Sanborn could potentially win, because Matt Adams, to me, isn't turning any heads. We'll see after tomorrow, after I see him live, if he is actually going to turn my head. But Jack Sanborn could be somebody that is fighting for that position. Now, next position battle is the edges. So the defensive ends, as other people call them as well. And right now, the reason why I consider this a battle is still in a lot of places they have Al-Qadin Muhammad as the starter over Trevis Gibson. I think that Trevis Gibson should easily be the starter, but there's still this stigma because he didn't show that he can stuff the run last year. He didn't show great run stopping ability. Al-Qadin Muhammad has. It's not amazing. It's just solid compared to Trevis Gibson, where it's not that good. But Trevis Gibson, phenomenal pass rusher, somebody that you want out there as much as you can, but he just needs to prove that to the Indianapolis Colts, the former Indianapolis coaches that we have on the team. But really, I think that this is Trevis Gibson's job. It's not that spicy of a battle, but it's something to at least note because technically Muhammad would be the starter if he's out there for first and second downs, because that's how the word starter comes about. Do you start the game? Yes or no? Now, next position battle, and this is where the last two, this is where it gets spicy. This to me is where it really starts to get fiery, because now this cornerback group is just going to be crazy. We already know Jalen Johnson. Put it in pen. He's going to start, because if he doesn't, then we have worse problems. But now we don't know where everyone else is going to be, because I haven't mentioned this yet. Tavon Young started at the slot when Kyler Gordon wasn't out there in the slot position. And they were saying they want the best three corners to be out there on the field. So what that tells us is they want to try people out. They want to be shifting people around. This is something that we need to pay attention to, because we saw Thomas Graham on the outside, and we've seen that he's been taking practice snaps at that slot position. So if I'm the Bears, I want to see Thomas Graham at both spots. And God forbid, Kindle Vildor could be somebody that they want to try out there as well. It's a different scheme, so maybe he looks slightly better. But I don't want to do that again. I don't want to see that again, because we got burned last time and he got burned as well. So we shall see. But I think that this is going to be a very interesting position, because I think that they're going to keep Tavon Young at that inside slot. I don't think that they would move him to the outside. I think it's a big question of Thomas Graham, because I also think that they wouldn't dare put Kindle Vildor as the starter. So I think it's a bigger question of, is Thomas Graham able to be an outside corner? And do they like Thomas Graham out there and then Kyler Gordon in the middle? Or where do they like some of these players? It's going to be a very, very interesting matchup. Personally, I want to see Jalen Johnson, Thomas Graham, and Kyler Gordon out there, because I want to see the future. I want a young cornerback group that's out there, but I don't want Thomas Graham to be thrusted out there if he's not ready. So I hope it's those three, but it's definitely something to look out for. And the last, you can probably already guess which one this would be, but the last position battle is this wide receiver group, because this, to me, I'm almost ready to say, listen, you're going to have Darnell Mooney as your one, and then everybody else is just going to be random out there. Because it sounds like N'Keal Harry was out there a lot catching some passes. Velus Jones Jr. was out there catching passes. Pringle was out there catching passes. And then it seems like everybody else is kind of up in the air. But I really think it's going to be down, like when you start looking at the battles, the true battles, it's going to be Jones Jr., it's going to be Byron Pringle. It's going to be N'Keal Harry. It's going to, honestly, Equanimous St. Brown could be fighting for it, but to me, he's the favorite to not be out there. He's got familiarity with the system, but I think that when you talk about talent, the other three are a lot more talented. But I think the next person just to be on the lookout for would honestly be Dante Pettis, because of his game-breaking ability. I think that he's a dark horse to potentially get a little bit of playing time. I don't think he's going to be amazing, but he is a dark horse at least, because when he's out on the field, he shows that he's a playmaker, but he's always injured. So if he's a good player, except when he's injured, don't you want that good player out there? Something to at least be on the lookout for. So also, Byron Pringle and Darnell Mooney basically played about 50-50 snaps from the outside and the inside as the slot and outside receivers. So to me, you have a lot of flexibility as well. You don't know who's going to play where, and I think that's going to throw a lot of defenses off, and that's probably what this offense is going to want to do. And N'Keal Harry brings something completely different, and he talked about this during his press conference. He's really the only physical, true physical wide receiver that they have out there. Equanimeous St. Brown is big, but you wouldn't consider him a physical presence. He's more of a catch and run. He's not huge. He's not a Moss type of guy that's going to just jump up and try to steal the ball away. So it might be nice to have that possession guy, kind of a little change of pace at a wide receiver position. But this is seriously going to be very interesting. I can't wait to be at training camp just to see what they do. I'm bringing the kids out there as well, so we're going to hopefully get some autographs, see some players. Should be an absolute blast. But guys, thank you all so much for subscribing. Make sure to like. Also, thank you for everybody that listens out there as well. It means so much. Make sure to rate 5 stars. And guys, training camp is among us. And Unbearable Sports Podcast, we're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.
Thank you for listening to this Belly Up Sports Podcast Network product. Some said we go belly up, so we made it our name, and we're still here.